Life often consists of a set of problems that we attempt to fix. It reminds me of the end of the movie The Martian, the one starring Matt Damon. He's standing before a group of students, fielding questions about what it was like to be stranded on Mars. And he warns the group not to think that this couldn't happen to them, that we're all going to encounter a difficulty this large, and the way to get through it is to focus fixing on one problem at a time. And he says, hopefully, if you fix enough of them, you get to come home. Too many of us stranded in toxic relationships use this incredible wisdom, but to our detriment. We think we're living with someone equally invested in the healthiness of a relationship. It never occurs to us that we're not. Hi, I'm Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and also a narcissistic abuse survivor. In this episode of Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse, we're going to tackle this common misperception. Thank you so much for being a regular listener. Make sure to leave a review and let us know how we're doing. And for those who aren't subscribing, consider pushing that button so that you don't miss future episodes. And as a listener-supported podcast, your donation goes a long ways in helping support us and what we're doing here. Consider giving a cost of a cup of coffee. We greatly appreciate it. So let's listen in to this replay of a TikTok Live. One of the most common questions I get asked is, can a narcissist change? I remember wanting to know that as well. When I discovered that I had gotten into a relationship with someone who was cheating, it never even crossed my mind to consider whether or not this person had a personality disorder. I just started to try to look for everything that I could do to make things different. I was trying to look for a solution. I figured that's what couples do. There's something wrong in a relationship. You jump out, you get help, you fix things. That's what you do. You fix things. I've been a psychologist for 20 years. You fix things. It never crossed my mind that sometimes we're in relationships with people who can't be fixed. So let me explain what I mean. Most of us are under the assumption that personality disorders is a condition, just like being depressed is a condition. That when you have a cold, when you have depression, when you have anxiety, when you have something wrong, you go treat the symptoms. You get into therapy, or you take medication, you see a psychiatrist, you do things that fixes situations. That's what you do. But what if personality disorders aren't conditions? So what do I mean by that? That's why they're called personality disorders. They're not called a mental health condition. I don't know if you're aware of that, but the DSM-5 distinguishes the difference between mental health conditions and mental health disorders. So what is a disorder? A disorder actually is talking about our personality. Our personality has traits, things about us that are built in. We have how we deal with stress. We cope with when things are outside our control, when we feel insecure. We know how to connect with people, different kinds of people. We're pretty versatile. We have a lot of built-in traits that make us good or not so good at these things. But we usually have lots of them. It's like having a garage that's really well equipped. You have all sorts of tools. You've got the screwdrivers, a Phillips and a regular, and then you have a hammer. Maybe you have multiple hammers. You have all these different things that are in your garage. You have an equipped garage. Imagine our personality is similar to that some of us have a well-equipped personality to deal with all sorts of types of stresses that come up. But not all of us actually do. When you have a personality disorder, that means you have a garage that is not well-equipped. Maybe it just comes with a screwdriver and a hammer, and that's it. That's all you have to work with every single problem that comes up. That might work okay when you're putting in blinds to the house, but that's not going to be really great if you're going to try to build a house. You need all sorts of equipment in order to build a house. So now you're using the hammer and the same screwdriver to every single situation, irregardless of what it is that you're doing, whether it is putting in new flooring, you're trying to hang the cabinets, whatever you're doing, you're using the same type of tools. That's what a disorder is. Personality disorders, and this includes all of them, whether they have a schizoid personality, a borderline personality disorder, antisocial, or narcissistic personality disorder, they have only one or two or few tools, traits, few traits to handle all sorts of conditions that you and I are asked to do every single day to get through life. That's a personality disorder. Now, when you have a condition, you've been diagnosed, say that you get diagnosed with a cold. You run out and you buy zinc. You get your cough drops. You get your nose spray. You get all ready to handle the symptoms of a cold. And for those few days that you have a cold, you feel really miserable. You try to stay hydrated. You rest. You do everything you can, but you know something's wrong and you don't like it. But when you have a disorder, when it's your personality, it's who you are, and you have only a few traits, you don't know you have a problem. You don't know that it's that, in that way, it doesn't fit the garage example. You don't realize that you only have a hammer and a screwdriver. You actually think you're like everybody else and that you're as equipped as an average person, but you're not. You only have a hammer and screwdriver where your neighbor has a really great garage. But you think your garage is great. So you go through life thinking, I'm just fine. I don't have a problem. I don't know why people have an issue with me. I don't have an issue with me. But you don't know that you're approaching every single situation with only a hammer and screwdriver. But as a result, your house looks like a mess. Your relationships are a disaster. You're doing all sorts of problems because you don't have the full package of traits that the average person has in order to handle any given situation that you're faced. So as a result of it, you leave a big mess and you're unaware of the mess. And when they tell you that you're leaving a mess, you say, I'm fine. I like who I am. I don't have any problems with me. You have a problem with me. The problem is you. The problem isn't me. You're the one. If you don't like it, you're the problem. And yet, we all, those around them, look at them and say, but every single situation, this is how they handle it. They get angry, they lose their temper, they are manipulative, they lie, they do all sorts of these things every single situation, and they don't use a variety of tools. They don't know how to connect, they don't know how to be apologetic, they don't know how to reflect, they don't know how to be empathic. They just apply themselves the same way, the same tools to every single situation. That's what a disorder is compared to a condition. Personality disorders is a disorder. A disorder is something that lacks traits in the personality that other personalities normally have. And as a result, they're handicapped when it comes to relationships. This is not fixable. You can't just suddenly you can't go in and say, oh, you know what? This person lacks empathy. Let's just inject empathy into them. No, they lack empathy. For the rest of their life, they're going to lack empathy. That's a personality disorder, which creates a lot of chaos for everybody around them. But it doesn't create a whole lot of chaos for them because to them, they're fine. They don't see the problem. They're doing just well. You're the one who has a problem because you're feeling chaotic by living around them. But let's go back to where I started. I started saying that when I ran into the first problem with my second marriage, I thought, like everybody else thought, we just work harder. It's fixable. We just need some therapy. We need to set new boundaries, new rules, blah, blah, blah. I just thought like normal things. I approached it like a normal situation. The problem is I never once considered, and here I am a psychologist, I never once considered maybe the problem isn't the problem. Maybe the problem is the person is the problem. There's a problem with the personality, and that by applying it the way that I hit every other problem, I'm actually not making it better. I'm actually putting myself at risk, and it's not going to work. And I'm going to only blame myself for it not working and working harder. It never crossed my mind. That's why I love this community. I'm so thrilled that you're joining me here today and that we can talk about these things, because this is how we can help them, but we can also help ourselves. This is how we reduce the distress, reduce the chaos, reduce the destruction that's done to all of us as a result of these conditions. It's a condition. I'm sorry, it's not even condition, it's a disorder. How these pervasive, by the way, why do we use the word pervasive? The reason we say pervasive is because it means it's all the way through the personality and it's consistently being applied throughout their whole life and it doesn't change. That's what it means. It's a stable instability. They're unstable, but they're stably unstable. They don't change. They're chaotic. I'm a year out after leaving an abuser and I'm still angry a lot. Is that normal? One of the things no one warns us about when we get into this is that how much grief there is post-trauma, post-abuse, that our whole life has been blown apart. Now, I'm a widow, so I was married 31 years to somebody, and he died. I got to actually have a funeral and say goodbye and do all the things that we do to acknowledge the end of a relationship. What's bad about these types of relationships is that we don't get to have a funeral for the person we thought we met and fell in love with. We just slowly begin to learn that we are in a relationship with somebody that we don't know and that the person we thought we met never existed. And that's a death. We have to then acknowledge the person we thought we met and fell in love with never existed, and essentially they're gone, and that's grief. But we also, as part of the healing process, have to acknowledge the fact that the life we thought we were going to have with this person is also gone, has been blown up, blown apart, and now we don't have those future dreams. We don't have the retirement with who we thought we met. We don't have a life that we imagine that we're going to have. We're now back into maybe some other version of a life, not maybe worse version, but just a different version. And that causes a lot of grief. And grief for me contained a lot of rage. I was really angry that cancer killed my first husband. I was really angry that at 52, I was widowed and suddenly on my own, not having a retirement, not going on vacations and learning to golf and all the things that I thought we were going to do together. All of that was gone, that we wouldn't enjoy our grandchildren together. All of that was gone. I was really angry, felt very unfair. So I'm wondering if maybe one reason why you're still angry 1 year out is because you're grieving. You're grieving of everything that you lost and that you don't have. And maybe you're pissed that you ended up being duped. You're ticked that you lost the life you thought you were having and now that you don't have. You're angry that this person lied and betrayed you and presented it one way, and then you found out it was something completely different, that they didn't want what you wanted, and that you ended up, now on your own, and you never intended to be on your own. So I hear that. So what do you do? What do you do when you're in that spot? Well, I found by processing it aloud, like you coming here and asking that question is really, really helpful. I found that by acknowledging the loss, being angry about it, and then beginning to look at it in a different way really helped me move through it. But it takes time. Grief is one of those situations, those feelings that don't just disappear. It fades. That's what I found. It fades. It gets lesser over time. It still hits me. I still have waves of it, but it hits me lesser and lesser as more and more time passes. I feel bad for all of us. I know so many of us are in this spot together, but we're healing, and that's what's so wonderful, is that we're healing. My book, Love You More, The Harrowing Tales of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross, is an up-close, in-your-face, true story of what happened to me. So many survivors tell how alone they feel in the thick of an abusive relationship, the shame and fear and paralysis that keeps them stuck. They wonder if something's wrong with them. How could this happen to them? If this describes you, then you're going to want to read my story, because this can even happen to a psychologist. Learn what subtle initial signs I missed, what kept me trapped, and how I finally got out. Be encouraged by my story to know that you are not alone. Is covert narcissism the worst? I wouldn't say it's the worst, but I think it's insidious and it's difficult to identify. Maybe that makes it so tricky. But I would say the worst is a malignant or destructive, or also known as a narcissistic sociopath. But let me describe both and tell you why I think the latter is worse than the former. Covert narcissist, by the way, is now called a vulnerable narcissist. They're called a vulnerable narcissist. They are the deflated, grandiose narcissist. In other words, life has not gone right for them. They feel mad and jealous and angry that life has not turned out. Life feels unfair to them. And as a result of that unfairness, they're the perpetual victim. They're always whining about how things don't turn out. And you think when you meet them, because it sounds reflective, believe it or not, isn't that sad that when we talk about how life isn't going well for us, we end up assuming that means self-reflection or empathy, because it's the softer side of things. So we mistaken it for that, but it really doesn't reflect that. It just reflects a preoccupation with how life is unfair. That's what doesn't mean they're empathically sensitive about the unfairness, but they want sympathy. So the supply they're drawing from us is sympathy, for them to feel bad, for them to rescue them from this, to somehow save them from the unfairness of life. But again, we mistaken that as sensitivity, and then think that they have a heart, and that this is going to be a person who's going to be reciprocal, that when we have a bad time, they're going to be there for us, just like we're there for them when they have a bad time. We think that. But what we find out when we get into the relationship, that all the other personality traits of a narcissist are present. They never are present for you. They usurp the focus all the time. They're envious of your accomplishments. They don't trust you, don't rely on you. Intimacy is not good. You think it's going to be really good, but it's not good. So all the problems you have with every other type of narcissist is present, but you've made the error based upon their centering it on how things go wrong for them. You make the error of thinking this is a more together person, and they're not. And the other way that they're really, so that's the first thing that's upsetting, is we mistakenly miss them. They're very hard to identify. The other problem with them is that they are passive aggressive. They handle their conflict passively. They don't handle it overtly. So they're not in your face. They do more insidious kind of deceitful things, like missing events with really important events, because there's always another thing that comes up more important at the last minute. So you think they're showing up and then they don't show up, or they're late. They make you late. There's always something that keeps them from doing what they say they're going to do for you. There's all these ways that they sabotage you, but they do it in a way that you can't directly attack them about it and say, that hurt me. They'll say, well, how can I control the fact the car doesn't start? Or I didn't know work was going to need me to do that. And yet they know these things are really important to you, and that doesn't matter enough for them to do it, to show up for you, partly because they're envious of you, and they want these things not to show up, happen good for you. So they're sabotaging your successes. So they insidiously sort of tear you down. I think that's the other reason why people really struggle with this group, because of that. So let's talk about what a destructive or a malicious narcissist is, or a sociopathic narcissist are. That group, they can also, by the way, be pretty tricky too. They can be pretty insidious as well, and difficult to identify, because they're so good at masking. They're more predatory-like. So initially, you meet someone super charming and you think they've met this wonderful person. You don't know that you've met somebody who's setting you up and has more nefarious, more darker reasons that they want to be in a relationship. Usually it's strategic, and you've been targeted, and they then begin to almost sadistically, cruelly tear you to pieces, because a narcissistic sociopath is a combination disorder of a narcissistic personality disorder with an antisocial personality disorder. So you're getting the combination of a sociopath with a narcissist. So it's as a result, they're dangerous. They usually have histories of breaking the law. They're lying. They're very deceptive. They have no qualms of doing whatever it takes for them to have an advantage. And even in the relationship with you, it's nothing for them to do whatever they need to do for them to have an advantage. And they see you as competition. All narcissists, by the way, see us as competition, but a destructive one really sees you kind of in an aggressive, angry way as competition. So in my opinion, both of them are not easy. Both of them are very challenging, but for different reasons. One, because we feel so duped and we're hurt, and it's so, one-sided. And the other ones, because they're ruthless, sadistic, cruel, and they're calculating. Very scary. Can they be overcome spiritually? And I know what you mean. For example, can good meditation, can, mindfulness, can a sense of having a higher power, can all of that help mitigate some of the worst of these symptoms? Can even if you're a Christian or Muslim, or can God overcome these nasty qualities? Now, As a believer, I do believe God can change us. And there's even examples in the Bible that says that. I mean, Paul has a pretty radical conversion on the road to Damascus. I have a feeling that if we met Saul, who then became Paul, I think Saul is a narcissist, honestly. And even later, Paul's definitely has control issues. He gets into a fight with another apostle. So there's evidence that he's not always the easiest person to deal with. So yeah, I mean, we do see a conversion there. Is it possible for all of us? I think most of us, here's my take on it. I think most of us never submit to that degree. Let's go back to where I started today. If you have a deficiency, literally something's missing in your personality. And one of the big things we know is missing in a narcissist's personality is self-reflection. Okay, so self-reflectiveness is missing. How do you then allow, whether it is a outside entity like a therapist or a spiritual entity like a mentor or even God, how do you then allow anything to bring insight into you when you're not self-reflective or reflective? Then how do you change? You see, it becomes like it's a tricky problem. It's a paradox. How do you break the paradoxical bind? I don't know. Is it possible? Yeah, well, if you really believe and have faith, then anything is possible, but it's going to be difficult. And most people won't submit to it, especially people who have control issues and personality disorders. Most of them have control problems. So that means they have to submit to the expertise of another person. I think that makes it really, I think the likelihood is extremely limited. But is it possible? Well, I'm not going to say it's not possible, but I'm not going to bank on it. The problem is, I think we ask these questions because we desperately want to hear that it is possible, so that we then have a reason to keep holding out hope that it will stay. And here's what I realized as I was sitting in that second relationship, realizing I had somebody who's continuously lying to me, continuously cheating on me, betraying me actually treating me like the enemy, constantly making moves as if I was not trustworthy. I kept hoping there would be some profound change that would happen that would make everything different, that then I could persist in the relationship. But here's what I forgot. I forgot to ask myself, does this person make me feel safe? Do I feel like they have my back? Or am I constantly supervising everything they say and did? I was thinking about that today. This morning I started out and I was doing yoga. Back when I was in that marriage, I always did yoga in the bedroom in this person's presence. Why? Because I couldn't trust him alone. Why? Because then I knew he'd be on his phone contacting a girlfriend or sexting somebody. I couldn't trust him. He would take any opportunity to be up to no good. So I literally had to stay with him 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But here's the other problem. Doing yoga in front of him was a problem. Because why? Because I couldn't trust him to be good about me. He was critical, snarky, insulting, contemptuous. Why in the world would I want to do a downward facing dog with somebody in the room like that? Talk about infringing on my ability to take healthy steps for myself. I felt constantly under pressure and supervision and not safe ever. Is that good? Is that the basis of a relationship? No. I forgot to ask myself these questions. I got so persistent on not wanting to have a ding of having a failed relationship on my record that I failed to ask if this relationship was healthy for me, if it was good for me, if it was making me more of a person and building me up. I forgot to ask these questions. It was not. It was destroying me. How can you build a relationship with somebody that you can't even trust alone for 30 minutes, that they weren't going to be into something they shouldn't be in? That's not even an adult. That's a child. That is like living with a 3-year-old, not living with an adult. Then how can I commingle finances? How can we ever set long-term goals? How can I ever trust him with, we even had help in the house and he was starting to move in on the house. I couldn't trust him with anything or with anybody. And that's a makeup of a relationship. I want that relationship to work. I'm sorry. Any of that to me is automatic failure. That is a person who never married you in the first place. I wasn't married. He didn't make those vows to me. I made them, but he never made them back. Do you know what he asked me? He told me a year into the marriage. This is a year into the marriage. He said to me, I realize that I need to practice celibacy. I'm thinking, celibacy? We're married. That doesn't go really great over celibacy. He goes, what I mean is that I'm going to only think about my wife sexually and no one else. What? What? There's no monogamy, not even in your thought life? You're not even giving me monogamy? That's not a commitment. No one made any commitment, no vows, no nothing. But that's what happens when you get into the relationship with toxic people. We get into relationships with people who are literally using a different language. They have a different value system. They have a different base trust level. They won't plan to be intimate with you. They are deficient. They are deficient. And these deficiencies can't be fixed. They can be compensated for. I put nails in my walls without a hammer by using an iron one day. Do you think that was a very straight nail? Do you think I could nail very many big things into my house? No. Yeah, you can find workarounds. They're not going to be good workarounds, and they're not going to be as efficient, and certainly not going to be, you can't do as much as you could have done had you had somebody who had a properly equipped garage in your house. But it's possible. It's possible to compensate for the deficiencies, but they'll always have the deficiencies. Always. And you're right. Some of you said you can spend the rest of your life learning to compensate with that person's losses, but it means this is what you'll be living without with. I can tell you what you'll be living without. You'll be living without anybody that when you're having a bad day really has your back. They will not have your back. You'll be lonely a lot. You'll be living with somebody who, when it comes to growth and having insight and really making big changes, they'll talk a good game, but there is no authentic action on it. You're going to be living with somebody who gets bored really fast and jumping from thing to thing to thing to thing. So your life is driven by rather constant chaos and change. Yeah, it's a very lonely and isolated existence. So yeah, you can want that for whatever reasons. If there's enough other resources you're getting, I don't know what that would be, that seems worth it enough. Yeah, okay, maybe. But I'll tell you, that's not what I want. What I want in a relationship is I want someone who's all in, who's stable, who has my back, who really knows how to show up for me as I know how to show up for him, and someone I can trust, really trust. And that is not someone with a personality disorder. It's not. It's not. Very sad, but very true. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. One of the best ways to heal is to do it in the safety of a community with others who get what you're going through. Don't try to go it alone. Join the Toxic Free Relationship Club, which is hosted on an app called Vibely, Vibely. It's a private group. No one except the other members will know what you're sharing. Come and heal with those who get it. By using a coupon code HEALNOW22, you'll get $3 off your first 3 months, and find out more through the link in my show notes.